Zach, it has been a while since it's just been a you and me episode, man. This honestly feels a little bit weird.
It kind of does, Gabe. I don't know if we could say back by popular demand or, maybe we are just the subject matter experts in today's subject, but we've had some fantastic guests on lately, some very nice conversations here. But Gabe, it is great to have just the two of us back again. It kind of feels like, like when you come home after vacation, you kind of just like sit down and like relax. Or maybe you come home after a long day and just like sit down for a minute. Kind of what it feels like. There's not much pressure in the room right now.
Oh yeah, that's a good call. I like that. Yeah, I love having the guests. It is awesome, and we've had some great guests lately for sure. So I appreciate you calling that out, Zach. I think we've had some really awesome ones with Scott and with Bridget and with Aline last week. It's definitely been covered a bunch of topics, but yes, this does feel, yeah, like you said, a little more relaxed. Just you and me. We're just hanging out, buddy. It's good. And I
Well,
am. Oh, go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say, well, there's no real agenda. We could talk about anything we want today. So of course we're gonna talk a little bit about cars, Gabe. I didn't want to interrupt
Yes.
you there.
No, that's all good. I was just going to say we got to get into our a topic that we've been wanting. This is a topic that we've been wanting to discuss for a while. You and I have been texting about it. We've been chatting about it, but it hasn't really fit into any of the conversation that we've had recently. But this is around Slate, which is the new electric truck company that has, I guess, what was it announced maybe like a month ago, Zach, something like that.
It's been fairly recent, but
Yeah, it's been
yeah.
pretty recent. But Zach and I have been obsessed with this because of the ability to customize and personalize the product that you're buying. And personalization is something, Zach, that we've talked about a lot on the podcast. But I love rethinking this whole buying process and taking some of the things that we've seen work well from a personalization perspective in other industries and starting to forklift it over to the car industry.
I'm glad you mentioned that rethinking because we'll actually kind of walk through the Slate website with everyone today. I think Gabe and I kind of picked out our future cars already, or our future
I want
trucks,
one so
but
bad.
it's such a new way to buy vehicles. Like we've talked about companies like Tesla in the past. We've talked about my favorite company, Rivian, in the past, and how it's such a unique, you know, experience, I guess you would say, compared to the more legacy, buying a car model. And I think this is the most interesting one I've seen yet.
Agreed. And the name works so perfect for what they're trying to do. So for those who don't know, the Slate is an electric truck, but it's a very stripped down version of a truck. It basically includes no bells and whistles, and they're really pushing back against, I would say, probably the Rivians of the world who are charging, I don't know, Zach, 80, $90,000 for a fancy electric truck, which has all kinds of bells and whistles. And they're, what Slade is saying is, hey, these things have gotten too expensive. They've got a bunch of stuff in here that you don't need. We're stripping it back to the basics, still a high quality vehicle, but making it very baseline. And then the things that you want to add that are interesting to you, we have packages or bundles that you can go ahead and just add to this to personalize it in any way that you want. And I think that's such an interesting way to do this.
Gabe, you said something about being like Slate being basic, and I think we should clarify what we mean by that. This car doesn't ship with stereo, like that's how
Yeah.
basic it is. And I, if you're kind of following along with the podcast, Slate.auto is their website, and of course, Gabe and I had to critique the website. And being the consumers, we always talk about, what does this look like from a consumer perspective? Remove yourself from your own buyer flow. Stand in your consumer shoes, and what does this look like? Same thing here. If I was to buy a Slate, is it buy a Slate or buy a? If I was to buy whatever the heck this is today, one of the things I
Personalize a
like is,
slate. I don't know.
yeah, well, that's exactly it. The first tab on their website is personalization. That is the first tab you see.
I, it's brilliant. I love it so much. And I love that that's the first landing page that they have there on the top of their website is personalization. It allows you to go through and think about all of the things that you would want to do to actually personalize your truck.
The headline, or the headline on that page too, Gabe, is "We build it, you make it," and I just think it's fantastic. And as like you kind of scroll through this page, like the images show you like the different options as well.
Mm-hmm.
But on this page, there's also, so it's electric, as you mentioned, Gabe, and I think with like the electric vehicle, it's a big, I would say it's a lifestyle change, right? Like you're not going to the
For
gas
sure.
station, you're potentially waking up with a, you know, lack of a better term, a full tank of gas every day. So this is new to a lot of people. And what I like here too is on the charging page, the headline is "Everything you need is included," which I just love because you know if you're buying this car, again, what do you need as a consumer? Well, hey, it's all included. Like, don't worry about it, is the vibe this is giving me.
Well, they're also knocking down potential objections. So on that same charging page, and they actually have this on their main homepage too. They do this whole thing about, hey, if this is the first time you've bought an EV, we know it can be a little bit of a transition. Don't worry, we've got all these resources to help you through this and to help you through this transition. So they're immediately addressing those potential objections that somebody would have and then knocking them down by providing a bunch of great information and insight. So I think it's a brilliant way to set all this up, much more of a DTC way to set it up versus what we see with most traditional car companies. It's going to be really interesting to see how this performs once it's actually available. Right now, you can throw your $50 down and get on the list. But the other thing I wanted to call out there on the website too, Zach, is that makers page and the bundles that they have in there. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we get through the rest of the podcast today. But I loved those bundles, and I know that really jumped out to you as well. To personalize with that kind of pre-built bundle.
Yeah, I have to say though that that fastback SUV kit looks awfully like that Rivian R3 that I've been eyeing down. Just more of a robust version, maybe. But yeah,
They're
like you
probably about
have
forty
this.
thousand dollars less.
Oh, you no kidding. You have the starter packs, and it's interesting because as I was scrolling through these, they have some very unique names. And of course, each name and even the product image is very much associated with a buyer persona. So, like the one I just clicked on here, the Snow Dog. The only like about this car sentence you have is quote, "Now you can coordinate your truck colors with your skis." Well, who did that tell me the Snow Dog is for? It's in the name, it's in the description. So
Mm-hmm.
I love how they've I mean they've simplified this so much that you could make some easy buying decisions here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. But still with that view to personalization. And, Zach, you mentioned that it doesn't even ship with the stereo. That is something you can add. You can swap out the grill. You can swap out the tires. You can swap out that they don't paint it. They wrap the car in a particular color. So there's all kinds of different things that you can add. You mentioned that you can even buy the SUV kit where you can, that's something I would have to get so I have some place to throw my children in the back of this car. The original truck, quote unquote, doesn't come with a back seat. Well, you can buy a kit that has that nice little fastback SUV design that Zach was talking about, and seats that go in there too. It's just such a cool way to frame it up. I love this so much.
The thing I like too is if you go to any other automaker website, and I'm going to say legacy automaker, but when you go on, you have the different options and it says, oh, well, to include this option, you need these other three options, or, oh, well, now that you want these tires, you have to have these trims, or so on, so on. I'm on the summary page. I've selected all my options. I'm ready to buy. I can just click reserve my slate and I'm off. Or there's a share button, which I really like too, because obviously, Gabe, I'm going to have to send you a link to what I just built. But I just love how simple it was to quickly find the product that resonates with me. I really like that Snow Dog. I know I told you a few weeks ago that I wasn't a huge fan of like the design of these, but like now that I'm like seeing the one that again I'm connecting with, the one that best resonates with my lifestyle, I'm interested, Gabe.
Well, the interesting part's going to be to see how many of the quote unquote base versions you even see around. And I suspect that answer is going to be almost zero because people are going to go on and they're going to add personalization to this. And what you're going to see driving around once these things are available is, a lot of these personalized ones. The only thing that bums me out about it, I think there is an extra battery pack you can buy, but the standard range is like 150 miles, which is not very much, which is
I feel
a
like it
little
would
bit of a
be
bummer.
maybe not a good highway vehicle, but like good
Mm-hmm.
for running around town.
Totally, which
Um,
is probably 95% of my driving anyway, so it's probably
yeah,
okay for somebody
I
like me.
I want to point out one thing. hypothetically, Gabe, if I was to buy this, it's a one-click buy. I've got Apple Pay, Google Pay, and even Cash App. So, mid
Interesting.
podcast, I'm over here reserving my slate. But the last thing I want to say about Slate is I think every single page has the word personalize or personalization somewhere. Like even I'm on the checkout page and it says reserve now, personalize later. There's a huge emphasis on again making this product your own and
Mhm.
making it something that's going to fit with your lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. Like I said, I'm just really curious to see how this goes over the next whatever 12 months as these things start to roll out. I think they're definitely going to be popular though.
So the
Well,
real question though, Gabe, will be your wife. Are we going to be buying a Rivian or a Slate? That's going to be the big question.
probably neither, if I'm being totally honest. But
Well, that's
if
no fun.
it's, but if I had to choose between one, I think I'd be able to get the Slate across the line because it's a lot more affordable. So if I was able to get one purchased for myself, it's probably going to be the Slate.
Probably not the Snow Dog version of the Slate though. But again, that's
Probably not.
how we go back to different products,
Yeah,
different
hey, snow dog
personalizations.
is great for you, right? I don't live in the snow,
Exactly.
so I don't drive in the snow. I actively, purposefully don't want to do that. So yeah, no, that snow dog's not for me. I need the beach one, man. That's the one that I need without the doors on
I'm jealous of that.
well, I don't want to make you feel bad about yourself about where you live. You live in a wonderful place too. It's just happens to get cold. Well, this leads us into kind of nicely, I think, in the discussion that we wanted to have today. And Zach, I've sort of forced this topic on you because of another book that I just finished reading that is called The Elements of Choice. And this book is all about choice architecture. And I'm going to read this description here really quick, just because I think it's very important to the context of the conversation today. So, choice architecture is the design of how options are structured, ordered, and described. And the goal here is really to guide or nudge people towards certain outcomes. And another really important point of choice architecture is you can't restrict choice. There is I guess like ethical components of this that are probably the best way to say it. So you don't want to restrict the choices that your customers are making, but you want to nudge them into the right direction into things that you know are going to be most beneficial for them. So I would highly recommend the book. It was a really great read, tons of great takeaways for marketers. We're going to talk through what some of these are today. The first one being a case study around a large German car manufacturer, but definitely would recommend Zach as a good read for folks who are wanting to understand a little bit about more about choice architecture.
At some point, Gabe, we will we will read the same books at the same time. I've been reading this book on product and everything, and here you are reading one on choice architecture. So we're gonna have like different
Ooh,
podcast
what's the one you're
discussions.
reading on product? I'm curious.
Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to like pull out my Audible now. Hey, can I say I'm reading it if I'm listening to it
Oh
here,
yeah,
Gabe? Is
that's
that
fine.
is
That's
that
fine.
allowed?
That's
But
acceptable.
it's called Hooked: How to Build Habit Forming Products. So
Mm.
more to come on that, but it
I
actually
haven't
will tie into this episode. I have a feeling.
I have another one sitting over here. I'm like looking at my desk, standing on my tippy toes to look over here. I have another one over here that's about that. It's called Consumer.ology, about building products. So maybe we need to compare notes on the books
Did we
books we
ever
read
did we ever
next.
talk about the one? Was it Why We Buy? Or I'm trying to remember the title of that book. Did we ever talk about
Hmm.
that one on the podcast?
We did, yes, yeah, we did talk about that one. That was a good one too.
Or we'll check that box off. But anyway, until the next episode of Gabe and Zach's book club, Gabe, I want to hear a bit more about this German car
Yeah, let's
manufacturer.
talk about this use case specifically. So there's a bunch of different studies that are discussed in the book, and one of them was a real life scenario with a large German car manufacturer, probably BMW or Mercedes, I would imagine. They didn't have liberty to say which car manufacturer it was, but I'm guessing it was one of those two. And the problem that they were running into is when people came to the website, they had dozens of options people could choose from, even for a specific vehicle. And what the leadership team suspected is that they were missing out on a ton of revenue because of this. And it turns out they were right. So as they started to dig into this a little bit more, into the design of the website and the choice architecture, quote unquote, that had been made, what they found is that nobody in marketing or leadership or sales had any influence over the design. Like somebody, web designer, had just decided to make these options available to people, and they had made the cheapest options the first thing that people saw, which I I know we've talked about this before too, Zach, but I feel like this is something that we see in the broadband service provider space a lot, where the cheapest option is the first thing that people see, or when they call up and get somebody on the phone, the first thing they're going to hear about is the cheapest option, because that's what they think is going to be the best option for people, even though it may not necessarily be the best, but we make assumptions about what people want and don't want.
Gabe, we see that so much, and now seeing a car manufacturer fall into this same scenario,
Mm-hmm.
I think we should talk a little bit about how we can avoid that, especially as broadband providers. I mean, I've never called into a broadband service provider. However, I have played the customer, calling into a broadband service provider with some of the success engagements we do with customers, and I can't tell you how many times it's, oh well, we have two plans, a 500 meg and a 1 gig, and you should get the 500 meg plan. Boom. Well,
Yep.
there's how much revenue you just lost because of that phone call downselling me into your lowest option.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it actually leads nicely into this, what they did to kind of fix these things. And it was really a two-pronged approach. It was defaults. So rather than just showing people a whole bunch of options, they showed them a default. And we're going to talk more about smart defaults later, because I think there's an opportunity to get even more personalized, going back to our Slate conversation here. But what a default is it's pre-selecting things that you know will benefit your customer. They previously were selling a lot of things a la carte and getting terrible attach rates of those a la carte activities, because most people didn't understand what they are, and they didn't understand what benefit they were going to get out of that. So by switching that to a bundle that included some of these things that they knew were going to actually be beneficial for the customer, they were able to get a much higher take rate on those additional options. Also, customers don't like to opt out of something. We do not, as consumers, we are loss averse. We don't want to feel like we are losing
Too
something.
much FOMO there, Gabe. Fear of missing out.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And so if we have to opt out of something, then we're much less likely to do it. The other piece of this was bundles. So going back to the Slate example, they looked at it sort of a similar approach. That ability to personalize with a bundle, or with a kit. If this particular manufacturer did something similar to what Slate is doing with their SUV kit, quote unquote, where it includes the back seat, the fastback thing, and a couple of other things that make it turn into an SUV. Or what Zach was talking through there with what was it, Zach? What's the thing called?
The Snow Dog.
Snow Dog. Thank you. The Snow Dog. That's one of their quote unquote starter packs. So Slate has adopted this model as well, of bundling things together based on what it is that you know is going to be beneficial for the customer.
Personalizing that, do I say personalized or standardizing that? I'm going to say experience because that's the best term I can think of right now, that product. And then having those add-on options, or not even add-on options, just those customizations of the product. That's exactly what we just saw on the Slate website.
Yep, absolutely. And to me, this really translates perfectly to what we're seeing with smart broadband service providers, who are creating logical packages that make sense for the customer, and they're based on a personalized buying experience. If we go back to the episode that we did a couple of weeks ago with Scott Goff from Gibson, he talked a lot about that personalized buying experience when people were coming to the website and seeing themselves in the packages that they've created. So that gets into that kind of smart default, so to speak, that we'll talk a little bit more about later.
Well, speaking of defaults, Gabe, let's talk about well, just that, and as a underutilized solution for BSPs, because a lot of what we see on websites, an increasingly number of, is most popular or recommended, or the right choice. Any terms that's highlighting your existing plan there, but I feel like they're not quite doing the right thing. I think it's a good step, but they're
Mm-hmm.
not quite personalizing that experience. Number one, but they're really pushing that to their subscribers and having that personalized solution for their lifestyles.
Yeah, we're starting, as you said, I think that's a good first step. Most popular, recommended, kind of boxing those things when people see them on the website. That's absolutely a great first step. But I've seen very few providers that are making a specific tier the default in the purchase process, especially when it gets to the purchase process. We sometimes do see that most popular or recommended on a website, but then when people actually get into the buy flow process,
It goes
oftentimes that
away.
falls apart. Exactly. I was looking at a provider earlier this week, and I was actually with this provider earlier this week, and we were talking about they default people into, it's not even a full default. It just kind of looks like a default. It looks like that this particular service tier is selected, and they have a very, very high take rate of of this particular service tier that they are defaulting people into. It's by far their highest service tier take rate, because they are defaulting people into it. They also, it's got a fairly aggressive price point, and I think there's a couple of other reasons that it's working there as well. But I did think it was interesting that they were basically defaulting people into the tier that they really wanted people to buy.
Gabe, I was buying an air conditioner this week for my apartment. It's summer, It's I was gonna say it's 70 degrees, but nobody's gonna understand how hot that is when you're in the mountains. But within the buyer flow, it got to a point where I read everything about the product. There's a specific model I want, of course, something quiet, something efficient. But then as soon as I got in the buy flow, it was asking me to pick, the model of the air
Mm-hmm.
conditioner I wanted, and I thought I have no idea what the features and the benefits and everything I just read, which model that applied to, or I didn't know which one had the inverter, which one did not have the inverter, all these things, because there was a disconnect from that landing page to the buy flow. I was starting over in the buy flow, and when that
Mm-hmm.
happens, well, just that, you're starting over. You lose a lot of that foundational knowledge or research, and you're lost. I think we did a podcast episode, Gabe, a few weeks ago, and we titled it something about are your buyers stuck in a maze? And that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly how I felt. I had done all this research, but suddenly within the buyer flow, none of that mattered because I just started over.
Yep. Yeah, that we see that far too often, unfortunately. And so the other story that was talked about in the book, or one of the other stories that was talked about in the book, was health insurance and people buying health insurance, and the complexities around that.
It's
And
complex.
it's extremely
I
complex. It's
Nobody told me this is like news to me, Gabe.
yeah, I'm sorry. Being a real adult sucks, Zach, where you
No,
actually
it's
have to make.
I remember the first time I got my own health insurance, like this, where like they print off like the 15 pages of all the details of your plan, and you have like, well, okay, well, this is just one plan, and oh, the complexities there, Gabe.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love this example because I think it's a great corollary for the broadband service provider industry. It's a very difficult topic to understand, and people throw terms around that they think people do understand: copay, deductible, these types of things, right? That don't necessarily make sense to the average consumer. And to me, it's very similar to what we see in the broadband service provider space. And the study that was talked about in the book was they ran a study to see how people would choose insurance when they saw 4 plans versus 8 plans. And these were with no default. So, not surprisingly, the people who saw 8 plans made really bad choices about what plan they should go with. They often chose plans that were, totally misaligned to their actual needs because there were frankly just too many choices. The other part that I thought was particularly interesting is they also asked people, what is your confidence that you made the right choice? And again, not surprisingly, the people who had 8 choices felt way less confident that they made the right choice versus the people who just saw 4. So we've talked about this before too, Zach, but people don't people want to feel more confident in the choices that they make. I say this all the time. I'm gonna get it like tattooed on me. But this is a perfect example of why showing people more options versus less options is a bad situation, because even if they do make a choice, which they're less likely to buy, they're still going to be less confident in that choice that they made.
I think we can all agree at some point in our lives, Gabe, we've been overwhelmed by choice, and we make a last minute buy, or we make like I got to get this done with and buy it kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We've all fallen victim to this.
Yep. Well, and as we think about how to do this better, so the better approach to me here is the smart default. So just to go drill down a little bit further on that, what we mean is this is a personalized default based on information you know about the customer. So I do think in the broadband service provider space, there's risk in just throwing out a flat default. Just let's say you have 3 tiers: 100 meg, 500 meg, and a gig. Obviously, you want more people buying your gig service because that's going to be higher revenue and that's going to be, more dollars back to your organization. But if you just default everybody into the gig, there's probably going to be some people who have a negative reaction to that. So I think there's a lot of risk there. However, if you're selling a family plan or a gaming plan like our friends at Gibson are, you can use data about the customer or prospect to push them into a default that actually makes sense to them. So you can, again, and maybe they've just giving you that data. We see people, Zach, we've talked about zero party data a lot in the past as well. Maybe people are putting their hand up and saying, well, I am a gamer. Okay, cool. Well, then when you go through the buy flow purchase, I'm going to default you into my gamer plan. And that's a smart default. I'm doing it based off of data that you have provided to me. So I think
And
that really is the best practice that we would recommend.
of course, we talk about landing pages all the time, but this is also where you could bring in things like the meta pixel. If we know we have someone who's keeps going to our gaming page or our family page, whatever that may be, having that ad on Facebook, on Instagram, take you back into that landing page, which takes you directly into the, call it, smart default on your website where you already have that personalized gaming plan. If
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you right now, if my BSB had a personalized gaming plan, I mean, I'd probably buy it. I wouldn't say I'm a huge gamer. I've got my Xbox, I've got my, gaming laptop, my
Don't
gaming
try and give me that
PC,
business,
but
man. You got your Oculus and your other stuff over there too.
I'm
So you're
like,
way more
yeah,
of a gamer than me.
well, Gabe, I could be at work from home too. That might be a better one too. But if I see that, of course, I'm going to click into it. But it's something that resonates with me, So number one, you're going to improve your conversions. Number two, get people into the right offering. And I
Mm-hmm.
think too with that, Gabe, uh, hopefully, if you can, deliver on that exceptional experience, you're going to have a happier customer in the end as well. They bought exactly what they needed. It's solving a problem for them,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe you have a brand advocate now.
Yep. Yeah, they're going to be super confident in that choice that they made because you used insight and information to get them into a default that actually makes sense for them. Again, I do think there's risk here, just like, well, let's make our default 1 gig and and hope that everybody buys that. Is that short term going to benefit revenue? Yes, it absolutely will. But you're going to have some people who have a real negative reaction to that, and that's where you kind of get into the ethics of choice architecture and nudging, and just by default trying to get people to buy the most expensive thing. Again, you've got to really think about that smart default of, okay, personalizing the experience to make sure that the customer is actually getting a default that makes sense to them based on the data that they've provided to you.
Exactly, Gabe. Let's kind of finish up this episode here by talking about the ordering on the podcast. And before we do that, I have to sneak
Yeah.
this in because I didn't send this to you this week with everyone traveling and everything. But I saw a thread on Reddit. You mentioned Oculus. I saw this thread on Reddit, and it was about the Apple Vision Pro, which we've talked about numerous times on the
Mm-hmm.
podcast. And it was basically like, I bought this, a year ago when it came out, and it's basically sat in my desk drawer ever since, kind of thing. But the Apple Vision Pro is always on the news, so every time I think of the Oculus, to your point there, the game or the use case around some of these high tech inventions, Apple Vision Pro just always just comes up short a little bit. So I had to share that little Reddit thread with you. But
Love
talking
Apple
about
Vision
ordering on the
Pro.
website,
Uh,
we've
yeah.
discussed this previously, I think in our decoding dollars episodes, which we're going to do a much deeper dive into in the future. Those were kind of backed by popular demand now, but these are conversations we've had with our customers as well. And you were telling me this great story about was it a wine taste test? But I want you to kind of share that with our podcast listeners here as we start to talk about how ordering on your website, your buy flow matters.
Yeah, and this has to do with recency or primacy, and where people see a particular thing or hear about a particular thing, and what choices they're going to have based on that. So yes, Zach, we have talked about ordering, and again, let's go back to that really simple example of 3 service tiers. Do you have 100 meg, 500 meg, and a gig? Well, are you showing them in that order, or are you flipping the order to show 100 meg first, then 500 meg, and then 100 meg last? And I would argue that based on the data that we hear in this book, it would be much better to show people the 1 gig service tier first, because in that particular example, they're going to be much, much more likely to purchase. And the reason I say that is based on the study that was done. This was around wine, a wine tasting. And so they gave people wine. And the ironic part was, is they said that they were giving them different varietals, different wineries, things like that. It was actually the same wine across every single taste test that they did, which is kind of diabolical and hilarious. But then they asked people which they preferred. And when there were like two or three choices, the vast, vast, vast majority of people chose the first wine that they tasted because that was still fresh in their mind. If they had six or seven choices to choose from, then they would choose the last one that they tasted because that was the most recent. So that to me tells me a couple of things. Again, if you have a relatively small number of options, which Zach, I think you and I would always recommend having, probably three options, maybe even sometimes less. We don't want 15 options for different service tiers on our websites. Then you got to be showing people you've got to be showing people the one that you actually want them to buy first, because that's the thing that they're going to remember. So I know there's a lot to unpack there, but it's pretty interesting thinking about that from a recency versus primacy perspective and kind of where people fall on that spectrum.
And speaking of recency, there's another one here, Gabe, we talked about. If Gabe and I were running for political office, not to get political, but I feel like Gabe and I, neither of us are interested in that. But if we were to run for political office, in that same book, it was talking about how the candidate whose name comes first on that ballot is more likely to get more votes. So in Gabe and I's case, I may be disadvantaged here.
You're in deep. You know what, man? Because with Zach Kilgore, especially if they're doing it off of first name, you are going to be in real trouble. Yeah, it turns out. So when there are elections, the first person on the ballot gets a lot more votes than the second person on the ballot. So if Zach and I are running against each other in a political election, if they just did it in alphabetical order, I'm much more likely to win just because my name would come first. So what I didn't realize is that they actually randomize the order in many states. So many states have this where they randomize the order. So in 50% of ballots, Zach, your name would be listed first. And in 50% of ballots, my name would be listed first, just to alleviate that statistical anomaly of, well, I saw that person's name first, so I'm going to go ahead and fill that circle in. It's wild, man. The political component of this, I just thought was so interesting. The story that was talked about in the book too was I'm pretty sure it was the 1996 election where it was George Bush versus Al Gore. Pretty
Wasn't
sure
that 2000?
Or maybe it was 2000. You're right. It might have been. You're right. I think it was 2000, which I'm sad that you remember that and I don't, because I was a hell of a lot older than you.
Oh, you better believe I was pre-law.
Yeah, there you go. So the issue that came up here was George Bush was listed first on the ballot in Florida. And if anybody remembers that election, there was all kinds of questions about the validity of the Florida vote. And it was a really, really close vote. And it pretty much decided the election. And people were upset because they thought that George Bush was first because his brother, Jeb Bush, was the governor of Florida. Well, it turns out that's not true at all. There was actually a law that was passed many years ago that whatever party the governor is from, that same party member will be listed first. So Jeb Bush is a Republican. He was the governor of Florida. Therefore, George Bush got to be the first person listed on that ballot. And so it's wild how, impactful something like that can be, especially when you're talking about very small percentage points in an election. But it just goes to tell you that, it goes to show that order really makes a big difference. And what people see first, especially in a relatively small list, makes a really big difference there.
It's funny though, Gabe, because the only situation this doesn't quite work out, and it's when it makes me laugh because of how accurate it is. And of course I see it all the time, but the only time when the last is best is when you're describing something like a list. The example of a waiter at a restaurant going through the specials, if they give you this long list, these long descriptions of each dish, the one you're most likely going to pick is probably going to be that last one, the most recent one.
Mm-hmm. Yes. picture that waiter coming to the table and, oh, we've got some specials today. Let me tell you about this. And they go through we've got fish and it was flown in from here. And, they go through the big long description. Well, they do that 3 or 4 times. By the time you get through all of those long descriptions, you're likely not going to remember the first thing that they told you because it was so long ago. So you probably panic and do the I'll take that filet thing that you talked about last. That sounds good. But it's a very different situation if somebody is actually sitting there describing the service or product to you versus you looking at it on a website and just kind of doing a quick scan. So I was thinking about this in a broadband service provider context, Zach. So on your website, again, we would recommend showing higher tiers first to increase revenue. That's likely going to drive higher revenue because people are going to see those 3 tiers and they're going to probably make the decision based on the first thing that they saw. If people are calling into a call center to have a conversation with the CSR to decide which service tier they should buy, then I'd actually flip that. You should have the description of the tier that you really want them to buy as the last thing. Because again, if they're going through this big long description of, let me tell you about our 100 meg service, let me tell you about our 500 meg service, let me tell you about our 1 gig service, by the time you get to 1 gig, they've probably forgot all of the things that you told them about the 100 meg service or even the 500 meg service. And so they're more likely to buy that last thing that you talked to them about.
It's funny you mentioned the specials, because the first thing my mind went to, where's my Gen Z audience? Number one is, didn't you guys look at the menu online before you got to the restaurant? And then number 2 was the dessert menu. Come on, that's where it's at. But Gabe, I think as we talk through these, I think more and more in life where I relate with these. The thing of reading the last thing, we've all panic bought, something as I mentioned earlier, but we've all had a waiter or someone in that situation read a list of options and I'll just go with the last one. Maybe I just don't care. They'll pick the last one. So I think that situation is just fascinating as well. But of course, me, I'm big into understanding how and why people buy, consumer behavior, and this fits right into that.
Yeah, it definitely fits into the psychology of how we buy and based on how you're being shown the information. The other example that was talked about in the book, Zach, I don't even think the waiter one was talked about in the book, but it felt like a good corollary to me. But what was discussed in the book was your significant other talking to you about different movies that you could go see. So hey, here's 5 different choices of movies that we could go check out this weekend. And they describe one, then they describe the next one, then they go through this long description. Again, by the time you get to the 5th one, you're probably yeah, whatever. That last one sounds great. And you've forgotten all about the first 2 that they talked about. So it's that recency piece that becomes really important, especially in those longer descriptions.
Gabe, this has been a fantastic episode. My AirPods are dying. So I am slowly getting I'm still slowly getting the notifications with the battery dying. But Gabe, fantastic episode here. I think we've both been kind of geeking out about buyer flows lately. Perhaps you more so, but we spend so much time not only on broadband websites, but think of again as yourself as the consumer, me buying that air conditioner and completely being separated once I got into buy flow. You just think of these, do we call them valleys, going off our John Pico episode, of these perhaps these low customer experience touch points in how they can impact either decision to buy or impact your brand overall. So Gabe, fantastic conversation here today.
Yeah, it was super fun, and we got to talk about Slate finally, which I was really excited about. That was such an interesting situation.
Yeah, it won't be the last time. I still have that tab open, so you never know what's going to happen once I hit the stop button on this podcast. I could have $50 less here in the next 2 minutes, but I do say one last thing about the Slate is as I was scrolling through, I mentioned the snow dog that I like so much. Gabe, the one without the doors on, the beach model, I can't remember the name now, but if you buy that, I'll come pay you a visit. Maybe we do a podcast episode in person in your Slate.
I like it. That sounds fantastic. Let's do it.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning into Buffering. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast app and to share it with your friends and colleagues. And for more insights and updates, be sure to connect with Gabe and I on LinkedIn.